Hello, everyone, and welcome to this week's edition of Double Down, the news and affairs programme that likes to put people first. We're broadcasting live from Dundalk and Dublin this evening, and I'm your host, Finbar Markey. We've got an interesting lineup for the show this evening, a very interesting lineup of guests. We're going to be joined by Jackie Fox. Jackie's 21-year-old daughter, Nicole, took her own life as a result of a campaign of bullying and intimidation by members of her own peer group. Since that, 3 years ago, Jackie has been campaigning for the introduction of legislation to combat online bullying and intimidation. And it would appear that by the end of this year, that legislation, to be called Coco's Law in memory of Nicole, is to be brought into action by the end of this year. We're also going to look at the topic of independent republicanism in the north of Ireland. And in particular, we're going to focus on aspects of the Good Friday Agreement and also in terms of the terminology used when it comes to independent republicanism, such as dissident republicanism. We're going to talk about how easy or difficult it is for independent Republicans to find their voice in the north of Ireland at the moment. Before we get into that, I'd just like to look at a couple of news stories that might have gone under the radar this week, and we'd just like to highlight them. The first one is we're going to turn to Edmund Honohan, who is the Master of the High Court in Dublin. Edmund has been in the news over the last few years as Master of the High Court because he seems to be a folk hero defending small businesses and homeowners against eviction and repossession. The role of the Master of the High Court is like a gatekeeper to the courts. So the Master has their own court, and their role is to make sure that all of the paperwork, if a vulture fund or a bank is making an application to repossess a home or a business or a farm, the Master's job is to make sure that all of the paperwork is in order before he puts it up to a judge to make a decision about it. Well, Edmund Honohan, over the last few years, has been refusing to send many of these cases on behalf of the banks up to the High Court and the judges because their paperwork is just not right. And this week, or I should say last week, Edmund has done it again. So there's a vulture fund called Prometoria, and Prometoria have been really miffed at Edmund Honohan because he's refusing to send their cases up to the High Court, which was not correct. Well, Prometoria took Edmund Honohan directions and orders up to the High Court themselves to challenge them, and it would appear on the face of it that the High Court was in favour of Prometoria. But nevertheless, last week, Edmund Honohan made another decision against Prometoria and refused to send the case up to the High Court again, adjourning the case. So all I have to say to Edmund Honohan, if you're watching, you are the man. You are the man. Let's turn to a less savoury situation and maybe even a less savoury character with Niall Collins, Junior Minister for Fianna Fáil. Fianna Fáil. In a reply to a letter from a citizen that was concerned about the sealing of mother and baby home files, the Junior Minister for Fianna Fáil replied, "There is a repulsive online campaign by some very nasty people exploiting the situation and the vulnerabilities of some." There's a copy of the letter there. Since that letter, he's been asked a number of questions about his response, and he's actually doubled down on his comments by suggesting that the campaign to stop the sealing of mother and baby home files has been orchestrated by political parties and that it's just a campaign by the opposition. Well, let me tell you something, Niall Collins, Junior Minister. We live in a state where none of the systems of justice are designed to meet the needs of the common man and woman on the street. And the only way that they can have their cases heard, to highlight the injustices to them, is to go to politicians and to go to political parties. And that is called parish pump politics. And Niall Collins and the members of Fianna Fáil and members of Fine Gael nurture that parish pump politics system for the last 100 years, and they continue to maintain it. So I think it's a cheek that Niall Collins should now point his fingers at campaigners and victims and blame them for engaging the only system that exists to try to get justice in this country. That's my preaching for tonight, folks. But I just thought those two stories needed a little bit more highlighting. I'd like to turn to our first guest this evening, Jackie Fox. Jackie's daughter, Nicole, 21 years old, took her own life as a result of bullying by members of her peer group. She took her own life 3 years ago. And since that, Jackie has really driven a campaign to introduce legislation to combat online bullying and intimidation. Jackie, Coco's Law. First of all, I'd like to welcome you to the program.
Thank you.
Coco's Law, it's just 3 years. Often these campaigns take 10 years, 15 years, 20 years. But before we go into just looking at Coco's Law itself, uh, we've seen images of Nicole there, and she's a really beautiful girl. And I've seen images of other young girls that have taken their lives because of bullying as well, and they're stunningly beautiful. But can you maybe give us an idea of what Nicole's personality was like? What was she like as a daughter and as a friend?
Uh, you know what? She was just my best friend. Um, she still is. I actually talk to her the most even now. Um, when she was growing up, she was bubbly. She was funny. She was very trusting, and I think that was a big part of our problem growing up, because of being so trusting. Um, she was just great fun. She don't get me wrong, she was cheeky, and I had often run up the stairs after her. But yeah, no, she was just so fun loving. She loved life. We spent a lot of time in Wexford down on the beach, and we grew up mostly in Wexford. For summer holidays, and she was just so outgoing and had a lot of friends when she was growing up. So,
And
best friend.
what happened, Jack? So she had a really bubbly childhood, a really bubbly kid. What happened to turn that bubbly kid into someone who would take their own life?
She grew up, and when she turned 17 and a half, 18, she started to experience going out in nightclubs. Everything was fine at the start, and what happened was jealousy, and this was admitted by one of the girls, that they tormented her and tortured her through jealousy. It started off physically, where they would do little things like knock the glass off the table when she was drinking, just little bitty things. But then it started getting, they put cigarette butts out onto her skin, onto her feet, and they pulled her down a flight of metal stairs by the hair. They burnt her with curling tongs, and saying, "Oh, sorry, I didn't mean that." And she danced on the dance floor, and Nicole would have been only my height. She would have been only 5 foot, and these were taller, and they'd be tending to be dancing beside her, where they'd give her, an elbow in the face or an elbow in the chest, really, to hurt her on purpose. They just never left her alone physically, but Nicole still always went out with a big smile on her face, and she said to me that she wasn't going to let them get the better of her. So she would go out with a smile on her face, and this actually annoyed them even more, where they started to go online then. Um, when Nicole took an overdose in 2015, I thought that was my worst nightmare. But and I thought things would have settled down, but they were actually claiming it as, she did it because of me, and the other one say, no, she did it because of me, and it was like a trophy they were actually claiming. But then it started. They knew they couldn't get the better of her, and it started to go online then. And every day, on whether it was Snapchat or WhatsApp, they made a group chat where obviously she wasn't invited, and um, they all joined together and they shared things around. And so by the time Nicole found out, it was too late. They also sent her videos of a noose on how to hang yourself. They told her every day to hang yourself, to die. Everyone hates you, no one wants you here, you're better off dead. And you know when you're hearing this every day, it started getting into her head so much, where this bubbly, lively, funny little girl of mine, I started to see it fade away. She stayed in her room, and she started to self-harm in her room. And she told me one night when I went in that she couldn't take it anymore, and the only reason why she couldn't die was because she didn't want to leave me heartbroken. And that was the type of person she was. She was still thinking of me through all this, so I wouldn't be heartbroken. But they did. They made up fake pages as well, and threatened to beat her up so badly and put her on life support machine. Mm.
Okay. And you were aware at some point, what point did you start to see the changes in Nicole and become aware that there was something just not right here?
From the start, because we would have been very close. anyway, and I knew all the bullies. I know all their families. So she told me at the very start, you know, and I at the start I didn't realize she was self-harming herself until I seen her legs and her stomach, where she got her nails and dug her nails in so hard into her skin till she bled. And you know, I was aware, just seeing that bubbly little girl just fading away, you know, and she'd stay in her room a lot then. And you know, I'd hear her crying before she'd go to bed, and she'd wake up the next morning feeling as unhappy and as sad as she did the night before. You know, I tried to lift her up. I did go to the guards, but the guards couldn't do anything because they could have done something about the physical abuse, but Nicole was so scared to make a statement, because she said, "Ma'am, look what they're doing to me now. Imagine being a rat as well, you know, and them finding out the guards are going to the door. You're, you know, they would have destroyed her even more, you know."
Yeah. And this fear that Nicole had of being a rat, as you say, of telling adults, which is basically what are mature adults, in the hope that somebody would do something about it. This fear that she had really prevented you guys from engaging services to do something about this. Nicole seems to have wanted to keep this into herself to a degree, did she?
No, just the physical abuse, but the online abuse, when the fake pages came and they threatened to put her on life support machine, beat her up so badly and put her life support machine, and then all the stuff that they send her, you know, the noose and all. No, she didn't want to keep that, but um, when we did go down to the guards about that, the guards said there was nothing they can do, because it's not a criminal offence in Ireland to annihilate. And you know, some I do use the word she was bullied. She wasn't bullied. That's a real playground word, you know, a real schoolyard word. She was tormented and tortured. And when I showed the guards all this, they said that there was nothing they can do, because you know, there's no legislation in to stop this, because it's not a criminal offence.
Okay. One evening you come home with your son, I think it was, if I'm not
Yeah.
mistaken,
Mm.
to find that Nicole had taken her own life. I'm not going to go into the detail. I know that you have spoken publicly about the details before. I don't
Yeah.
want to put you through that again. But can I ask you, in terms of when you decided that you were going to do something about this, Nicole had taken her own life. Usually we expect that there's a grieving process, but it's only been 3 years and you've progressed so far. Straight away, at the beginning of the grieving process, even then, had you made a commitment to yourself and Nicole that you were actually going to do something about this, or did that come after a period of grieving?
Yeah. No, um, it's weird, really. I didn't grieve at the start, and it's only after the first year, so the second year up to right now, is when it actually really hit me. Um, you know, I knew she wasn't coming back. I know I'll never see her smile again or hear her laugh again. I won't get her hugs again. I'll never hear her. Every night she'd say, "Night, ma'am, I love you," and I always said, "Night, night, Coco Pops, I love you." And it's only in the second year from now is when it actually hit me. And it's strange. The first year was actually the easiest, because you're numb, you're dazed. It hasn't hit you. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
The reality of not seeing her again, and not only that, it's kind of avoiding the situation. I sat on my bed one night and thought very, very strongly about going going with Nicole, and really strongly about going with her, because you know, I just wanted to be with her. And weirdly enough, that night I did think of my family and my sons, but weirdly enough I got a phone call, and that phone call changed everything. So instead of going with Nicole, I had to make a decision, and that's when I made the decision to go and do something about it. It was more like survivor mode, if you like, and avoiding the inevitable, what I'm going through now. Um, you know, the reality that I'm going through now of not seeing her again. But yeah, it was weird. No, it wasn't planned. Or to be honest, when the guards came to me and said that it wasn't a criminal offence, I was shocked. But to be honest, I winged it all the way. I knew what I wanted, but I didn't have a clue how to go about it. And I just kind of just winged everything, And
Well, so for us, I've met you at a number of mental health events, and for a small woman, you've got very strong wings. You've come a long way in a short period of time. When did you meet other mothers? And I know that you're very eager to name the other mothers that have walked along with you on this journey over the last 3 years. Would you tell us about your experience of meeting them and how that maybe offered you an extra comfort or support, if it did?
Oh, it definitely did. From the start, when I started campaigning, I was on my own. I didn't have anyone backing me up. And I had friends, but every meeting that I had to go into, I went on my own, and arranging protests and marches and stuff and all. And and things were going good, but I was getting knockbacks as well, and nobody was listening. No one wanted to know. Um, finally things started moving on, but when the government broke up that time, it went right back again. And uh, through the process, things were good and then things were bad. But it was only when I felt really defeated and deflated, I suppose. But even though I wasn't going to give up, um, emotionally and physically, I was tired. And I got a call from March for Justice Ireland, and was invited down to Limerick for a talk, and that's where I met you, Finbar. And along with March for Justice, there was another two mothers. There was Aisling O'Neill and Mary Sheehan, and they both lost their daughters too, through bullying as well, through online bullying. And it made a big difference meeting them. First of all, they didn't have to come out and talk and support me. They didn't have to do that, and they have done on many more occasions. Have come up and travelled up and spoke. To help me bring in Coco's Law. But to have two mums there that actually knows the pain you're going through, and they understand, and I understand what they're going through of losing their daughter. So having them there is a huge, they're a huge inspiration. And March for Justice Ireland, there's no words with the help that they've given me. They've given me a huge boost, to get back up and complete this.
Yeah.
Complete Coco's Law,
Yeah, and that would be there's a lot of membership around the country, but I suppose some of the driving force in Limerick would be Wesley Ryan.
Yeah.
Dublin would be Trevor Conlon. Yeah, two great characters. You have driven a rocket through the political establishment over the last 3 years and getting Coco's Law up to the stage that you've got it up. The Irish glitterati have made statements in support of you, left, right and centre. Stephen, could you roll a video of 2 years ago, Jackie lecturing and teaching members of the Houses of the Operatives about legislation and in relation to bullying and things like that? I think you were really impressive, Jackie. Have you got that clip there, Stephen?
A person or persons must be held accountable for inciting, intimidating or threatening behaviour that would lead a person to self-harm or commit suicide due to social media abuse. Okay? And where actions of abuse and bullying has consequences, the person issuing these threats has committed a crime. And that's what I'm looking for, is for someone to be accountable for. I'm not going to get Nicole back. Nicole's never coming back. But there is a lot of other people going to take her place. There's a lot of other families going to take my place. If someone isn't accountable for, if it's not made a law where someone can be brought to court, where you have loads of evidence on the phone, and someone can actually be brought to court.
Powerful, Jackie. That was only a short clip or segment of a much longer speech that you gave to the Houses of the Operatives. I think it was very impressive. So Coco's Law, Coco was your affectionate name for family and friends for Nicole, and beautifully the law is going to be called Coco's Law. Helen McEntee was in communication with the minister over the last week or two to just give you a progress report on where Coco's Law is at the moment. Could you fill us in on that, Jackie?
So far, the amendments are finalised, and it's almost ready to pass for approval. There's nobody opposing in the Dáil about this law, and yeah, it's all ready to go. Basically, you know, it just has to go through another couple of stages, which won't take as long. And stage 3 is the longest, but we're at the end of this now. And I have been assured that it's going to be in before Christmas. You know, I try and not get too excited, you know, due to other knockbacks, but they have, now I've got direct emails about this, and it is a priority, and they do want to see this passed before Christmas. So I am hopeful this time that it will be. Yeah. And it's not being discussed in the Dáil or anything at the moment now. It's actually being discussed in private sessions, which is great. So yeah, I'm so close. So close.
Brilliant. There's I don't want to put you on the spot, Jackie, and we do send the questions to everybody, but somebody just raised something with me this evening and thought that I should ask the question. As far as I understand, the legislation is designed to be able to discriminate between, on the one hand, for instance, political activism where you're questioning politicians online and things like that, and on the other hand, intimidation and bullying. And just somebody I was talking to this evening was a little bit concerned that the law could be abused by politicians and people like that just to stop people criticising them. But I have spoken to a few people that have suggested to me that there is plenty of room to discriminate between, on the one hand, criticism and on the other hand, bullying and intimidation. What do you think about that? Would you agree with that, or?
What is that? Say that. What do you mean?
The law, Coco's Law, it's been designed in a way, as far as I understand, that it can't be used against just anybody who's maybe questioning the government online. That it's really designed to identify real intimidation and bullying online. Isn't that right?
I'm not too sure about that, to be honest. I'm not sure what exactly what's going to be.
Yeah, well,
in that bit, I'm not.
Yeah, I did speak to a couple of people who said that the legislation will be broad enough to be able to make that distinction. So I don't think that there's too many worries that it'll be misused by anybody else. Jackie, the final question, because we're tight for time. Coco's Law is definitely going to be a strong deterrent to online bullies and people who intimidate and harass people online. Do you have any advice? Because some people will still try to do it anyway, probably. Do you have any advice for parents of children that are being bullied? And do you have any advice for the parents of bullies themselves?
For the ones that are being bullied, for the people themselves that are being bullied, first of all, don't leave it too late where it builds up in your head, you know, and it's you know, if you leave it too late and it gets built up so much, it's harder to get out of that situation. And there's always someone to talk to, whether it's your friends or whether it's teachers or people in the workplace. And for the parents, yeah, you know, try and keep an eye on their account, and if you have their passwords, I know a lot of kids would just change their passwords again, do you know what I mean? And with Nicole, these weren't kids, these were adults, so you know, you're not going to be able to change adults' passwords. And for the ones that are bullying, stop it now, because don't do the same thing that happened to my funny, lovely, bubbly girl. And you know, bullying people like that and tearing strips off them, knocking their confidence and making them feel like they can't live another day. And the ones that took Nicole's life away from me, these will have to live with that for the rest of their lives. So, you know, stop it now and don't have something like that on the rest of your life. For what? You know, a lot of people do it on Facebook for likes and shares and hearts and being popular. You know, is it really worth destroying someone's life for a few likes and shares on Facebook or Instagram or Snapchat? You know, think about what you're doing, because you don't know what's going on inside someone else's head.
Yeah. Okay, Jackie, we're just about up on time. I really enjoyed talking to you. Again, I just want to say I'm really sorry for your loss, and everybody here in the production team is sorry for your loss, and we understand that that's not something that's going to heal fully ever, probably. But we're all thinking of Nicole, that when the Coco's Law does come into place, or if there's any issues with Coco's Law, get back onto us. We'd love to have you on again to know what the progress is.
Thanks a million. Thank you for having me.
Jackie, thanks a million for joining us.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Bye.
Okay, that was a harrowing experience that Jackie had to go through and is still going through. And again, seriously, thanks for coming online tonight. We're going to move on to our next subject matter now. Independent republicanism in the north of Ireland. Some people call it independent republicanism, but it seems to be tainted with a stain with regards to whether independent or dissident Republicans actually have anything to say, or whether they're just inclined towards violence. I think the media generally like to put over that image that independent Republicans have nothing to say and that they're just thugs and things like that. We're joined tonight by Gary Donnelly, first of all, and Gary is a councillor in the Derry area. Let me just get this right. You have topped the polls twice, Gary, in the Moore, Bogside, Brandywell and Cregan constituencies in Derry. Gary, first of all, thank you for joining us this evening.
Thank you, Van Bar. Thanks for having me.
No problem at all. You've just actually come out of a council meeting where I think you've actually have two motions passed tonight. The second motion, I wasn't really aware of it until you just mentioned it before the show. But the first motion was in relation to the UK, the Covert Human Intelligence Sources Bill. And this is a bill that's been passed through the UK Parliament at the moment that basically, it would appear, gives the secret services and the British military intelligence services the freedom to do anything they want, including murder, steal, rape, whatever they want to do. Gary, can you just tell us a little bit, first of all, before we get into talking about independent republicanism, could you tell us what your position is on that bill and what your motion was about tonight?
Well, basically my motion was calling for the Derry City and Strabane District Council to do everything within its remit to oppose the bill, and we called on trade unions and civil liberties groups to encourage them to speak out against it. Basically, if this bill was passed, it would give carte blanche to British intelligence agents to commit crimes in order to preserve their cover. We have a history in Ireland, and when we look at back to King Cora, which was effectively a child sex ring organised and run by British intelligence in order to gather intelligence and blackmail and coerce people. We've had the murders of Pat Finucane and Rosemary Nelson, two human rights lawyers. They were both organised and carried out by British agents. The murder of Martin O'Hagan, a journalist, carried out again by British agents. And we've had the murder of Margaret Perry, a 26-year-old who inadvertently come across a British agent, and she was murdered by a British agent. Basically, civilians, non-combatants, whose lives were taken by British agents. We have a police force here that 40% of its budget is controlled by MI5. We see what these people have done in Iraq and Afghanistan and Libya, where they've cost millions of lives, particularly in Iraq, with false information saying that there was weapons of mass destruction. And effectively, if this bill, which is going through the House of Lords at the minute, is passed, that it will allow these agents to carry out murders, rape, torture with impunity, and they won't be taken to court. They never have been in this part of Ireland, but it will allow these people to do similar activities in Britain. We've seen them infiltrate campaign groups like the Stephen Lawrence Justice campaign group, and recently we've seen Dennis McFadden infiltrate and sabotage Justice for the Craigavon 2 campaign. So, it will also give agencies like the Food Standard Agency, the ability to do similar activity. Is just crazy.
Okay, and your motion tonight was for the council to condemn the bill, or what was that exactly?
To actively oppose it to the extent of its remit, and that bill was passed. I think it was 28 votes for, 6 against, and 1 abstention.
That was a very significant success in the chambers tonight. This isn't just a concern for Irish Republicans in the north of Ireland, is it? We have an MP in the UK, Zara Sultana, made a very powerful speech against the bill in the House of Commons last week. Stephen, do you have a clip of that speech from Zara Sultana there?
On the 12th of February 1989, Pat Finucane, an Irish lawyer in Belfast, sat at his kitchen table to have dinner with his wife and 3 children. As they ate, 2 gunmen burst through the door. They entered the room and shot Mr. Finucane 14 times. He was killed by a loyalist paramilitary group that then, as the Prime Minister at the time, David Cameron, admitted in 2011, was acting in complicity with British security services. Far from stopping Mr. Finucane's murder, the Prime Minister described, and I quote, the shocking levels of state collusion in Mr. Finucane's murder. His family are still owed a public inquiry into the murder. Deeply troubling acts of state agents like the Finucane case are not isolated. In 2010, it came to light that for 40 years, Britain's police had run covert operations spying on thousands of civilians. More than 1,000 political groups were spied on. Overwhelmingly, it was left-wing, anti-racist and climate justice groups that were spied on, with just 3 far-right groups included on the list. The Sky Cops revelations have shown that police operatives deceived women into sexual relationships, and that even spying on grieving families seeking justice, including the parents of Stephen Lawrence. Madam Deputy Speaker, this bill must be opposed. It places no limits on the crimes that state agents can be authorised to commit. It doesn't prohibit torture, it doesn't prohibit murder, it doesn't prohibit sexual violence. Instead, all it requires is that authorising officers themselves believe the conduct is appropriate, that is necessary by broadly defined criteria, and that it meets requirements that might be imposed by an order by the Secretary of State. Even the FBI expressly bans operatives from certain criminal conduct. But this bill doesn't ban any type of criminal conduct for British state agents.
I don't think any speech could have been clearer in the House of Commons in relation to what that bill is about. Do you think you could add anything to that, Gary, or does she cover it all succinctly?
Oh, I think she covers it. But most people, not just Irish Republicans, will concur with the sentiments expressed by Ms. Sultana. And as indeed will any progressives or humanitarians. What's proposed here is just absolutely crazy stuff, and they just give people carte blanche. They commit all sorts of crimes without any type of deterrent. Is nearly, it's unbelievable, even in the standards of the British establishment.
I think it's probably unlikely that the grey, dusty House of Lords is going to reject that bill now.
No, I doubt it. I think that I can't see it being opposed.
Yeah, okay. We'll move on, Gary, because we are time limited. You've been a community activist all your life. You've been an unrepentant Republican, as they say. And you've now been elected twice, topping the polls in your constituency. Gary, where did this community activism, this grow for your community, this drive actually originate? Can you pinpoint that somewhere?
Well, I think, it's a situation that I was born in, Finbar. I was born in Derry in 1970. At that time, we had the Orange State reaction to the civil rights campaign, where civil rights campaigners were beaten by batons at Burntullet and Duke Street. We had civilians being beaten to death by the British police at the time, Francis McCluskey in Dungiven, and we had Sammy Devaney, who died from horrific injuries he received after being beaten in his own home. We had, I grew up in an environment where people were being gunned down and killed by the British state. You had Seamus Cusick, Desi Beattie, neighbours of mine, Kathleen Thompson, and there was an environment where there was daily gun battles, riots. Almost effectively, what we had was a war zone, and we had an assault on our community by the British state, and so it was inevitable, given them circumstances, that a lot of young people became very politicised, and a lot got involved in republicanism, or at the very least had Republican sympathies. You know, we grew up against that backdrop. There was neighbours of mine who were on hunger strike, who were dying. There was neighbours who were being gunned down, engaging in you know, against the British state. And when you put it into the historical context, you know, I seen direct comparisons with Terence McSweeney, and soon came to the conclusion that the cause of conflict here was the British interference. You know, I had a classmate at school, 11-year-old child, Stephen McConaughey, shot dead with a plastic bullet from almost at point blank range. You know, so it was inevitable that I was destined to get involved in Republican politics.
Okay. And we had years of a military campaign to try to remove the British state and its apparatus from the north of Ireland. There was a lot of death on both sides. About 20 years ago or so, a bit more, the Good Friday Agreement was signed. You've been consistent, Gary, in your objections to the Good Friday Agreement. And you, to a certain degree, if in terms of the public purview of you, that's one of your defining political features, I suppose, is your objection to the Good Friday Agreement. What are your objections?
Well, you know, at the time of Good Friday, I was involved in Sinn Féin, and I seen Good Friday, the Belfast Agreement, as basically an agreement which copper fastened partition on the island of Ireland. It was, in effect, an internal settlement. You know, it institutionalized sectarianism, and these were things that within the provisional movement that we were told that, you know, there would never be an internal settlement, and effectively, you know, it led to the reactivation of Stormont, a puppet parliament, and that has set about vigorously promoting its, you know, its Ulsterisation, criminalisation, and normalisation campaigns. And whilst that was happening, our sovereignty, you know, it was still being violated. The cause of conflict, the reasons for the conflict, still existed. You know, the Good Friday Agreement, or Belfast Agreement, whatever you want to call it, was sold to Unionists as the copper fastening of partition. Nationalism sold it as a stepping stone to a united Ireland. You know, it couldn't mean both things. It's just, in my view, another failed British-inspired attempt to pacify and control this part of Ireland. It didn't deal with the you know, the core issue, the causes of conflict, which was the violation of Irish sovereignty. Therefore, it will condemn future generations, the conflict or potential conflict over that violation.
Okay. And when you objected to the Good Friday Agreement, around that time, what kind of response did you get from your community, from other activists, from, I think, were you a member of Sinn Féin at the time when they began negotiating the Good Friday Agreement? What kind of a swing back did you get when you objected and vociferously objected to the Good Friday Agreement?
Well, you know, you would go to meetings and you would soon realise, you know, if you expressed any sort of, you know, the provisional movement would have done scoping exercises. They would have tested people. They would have sounded people out to see, you know, how they thought. And when you started to go to meetings, you soon realised that the meetings were heavily sort of rigged, and that, you know, you then became, they started to ostracise you, putting pressure on you, and that in effect, there was members of the 32 County Sovereignty Movement. I left Sinn Féin in 1998 and joined the 32 County Sovereignty Movement. This was initially set up as a committee within Sinn Féin in order to protect the issue of sovereignty. And these people were treated badly. You know, anybody who knows the provisional movement, it doesn't tolerate dissent at all. And that dissent was quashed. And, you know, there was bullying, there was intimidation, there was abductions, there was torture. And that's the type of treatment that anybody who spoke out from, you know, from that provisional movement.
Okay, and you persisted in your defiance of the Good Friday Agreement politically anyway. You've been chosen to represent your community at a local level twice now. You've topped the polls. So you've entered into political discourse as your principal option. Do you think that there is support? Do you think that there is potential for a military campaign in this current environment to extract the British structures from the north of Ireland? Or do you believe at the moment that the best way forward is through talking and discussion and debate and local level politics?
Well, I'm committed to activism. I'm not involved in an armed struggle, but I think it's very difficult to quantify, support for an armed struggle. I think it's always been very difficult to even in past campaigns when you had the first actions of the Tan War, or what some people, in my view, mistakenly call the War of Independence. Dáil Éireann refused to support that. But what I would say to you is that the British state in Ireland has maintained all its war-footing measures, all that procedures. They maintain its position in the 6 counties, and that includes heavily armed paramilitary police who operate in heavily fortified military bases, armoured vehicles. They engage in house raids, stop and search, assaults on children. They have a child informant recruitment policy. They operate diplock courts. They freeze people's social welfare payments if they deem them to be, against the state. And they've also used threats to arbitrarily remove children from families of people that they would describe as being dissident. They still have plastic bullets, so what I can state is that there is absolutely, in the community that I come from, there is no support whatsoever for these measures.
Okay, and so you have on that one hand that very militarized environment, the security intimidation of the community that you described on a daily basis. But as well as that, your constituency has been declared the most deprived constituency in the UK in terms of economics and socio-economics. And as well as that, I think it was yourself told me recently when we were researching this programme that a poll done of young people in your constituency indicated that up to 90% of your young people want to leave. So to leave the Cregan, the Brandywell, that area, the Bogside in Derry. How do you get over that as a local representative? On the one hand, you're dealing with these macro political issues of the militarisation, etc. But on the other hand, as a local councillor, you're dealing with these day-to-day problems that people have. How do you just manage all of that?
Well, life in this part of Ireland can be a struggle, and I suppose there's a lot of similarities to other working parts of the island, including Dublin and maybe Limerick or Cork or whatever. But they talk about the peace dividend, and whatever peace dividend came to this part of Ireland, and we had great fanfare and all sorts of promises. Whatever has come has not filtered down to the people who need it most. We have political gatekeeping that prevents some of the people who need it the most for getting it. The social economic situation in this ward is similar to the days where we had the civil rights campaign. There's a false narrative being presented to the world that everything is good here, but on the ground things are very, very difficult, and young people have absolutely no hope, no prospects. And in that survey that you're talking about was done for over 1,100 children, and something like in the region of 93% of them said that they didn't see themselves having a future in this city, and that they intended to leave and possibly not come back. And it's unfortunately it's no wonder when we see the levels of child poverty, youth unemployment, the suicide epidemic, lack of industry, dwindling city centre, drink and drugs addiction. We have post-conflict trauma, lack of housing. We just top all the wrong lists, and unfortunately, a lot of these people were some of the most loyal people and their families, fought hard against imperialism, and they've just been failed. They've been failed by the political leaders.
Yeah. But it would appear that because there's more than one independent Republican councillor, I understand, in your ward, and it would appear from my research that you're doing this amazing work considering what you're facing on a day-to-day basis. Gary, we're extremely tight. We're over time as usual, but we're just going to have to live with that. I just have one last subject to raise with you, Gary. I believe that in the face of significant resistance, you have forced through an audit of what's called the Police and Community Safety Partnership Committee. And you have found significant inconsistencies in spending, etc., in that committee. But you've also found significant resistance to having that committee's work audited. Just before we talked about that, Gary, we have a little clip of you introducing a motion demanding that audit. Stephen, could you run that first?
Councillor Donnelly.
Thanks, Chair, and congratulations on your position. Chair, my concerns are regarding the audit of the PCSP, and I am miffed and surprised that given that there's 44 recommendations, that this has been given a tag of satisfactory. A cursory glance at this will tell you that there's very, very serious issues. And it's my intention here today is to propose that we do not accept this recommendation and that we put this back until full council, because there's a lot of stuff in it that needs to be, the volume of material here, and the enormous amount of what appears to be irregularities is very, very worrying, and I wouldn't be surprised if this could lead down the line to a forensic audit of this taking place. And I'm not going to go through them all, but in some cases here, ratepayers' money was used to buy cigarettes as prizes, bingo prizes. Invoices weren't included, invoices in different surnames. The system seems to be chaotic, and I have it all highlighted. A cursory glance at this will set off alarm bells. For anybody who has read it, can't help but see that there's something very fundamentally wrong. So I'm going to propose that we don't accept this report and that we put it back to full council so we've time to digest, basically, because I was actually surprised at what I had read in this report.
Gary, is somebody having a party and billing the people of Derry?
Well, Funbar, that's what we don't know. Now, I want to clarify something. In the past, there was a similar situation, and it was to do with stewarding tenders, and we seen sorts of, all sorts of irregularities, and we pushed for an independent forensic, an external investigation, and that was resisted vigorously. They eventually caved in, and we got that. And whilst they were telling us everything was okay, it ended up that the external report said that there were made 74 recommendations that said the system was shambolic. Now, this current audit was one done by a group called the Police and Community Safety Partnership. It's been the first time that's been audited in 5 years. And when it was audited, they picked 5 examples of funding applications. And when it came out, there was effectively the 5 of them all had issues. And there was, as outlined in that clip, there was cigarettes bought for prizes for a vulnerable adults day centre bingo session. There was plane tickets where they didn't know who was on the plane. They didn't know how much it cost. There was there was stuff for group meals, flowers, and we weren't given proper explanation. Now, if you put your hand into a barrel of apples and you pull out 5 and the 5's wrong, then there has to be serious alarm bells. But this is being vigorously resisted at this minute in time by basically the Sinn Féin and the DUP blocked it. We then initiated a call-in, and again they blocked it again. But the small victory of the night, where we effectively agreed that if they can't account for money, that money wasn't given over legitimately, then we as a council need to claw back that money.
Okay, well, Gary, we're out of time, as I said. I'd like to bring you back again to update on all of these different processes that are happening, that you're driving forward in and around Derry. We're going to have to go for now, Gary. We've got 2 other guests waiting. Thanks for coming on the show, and I'll talk to you soon. Good Michael. Okay, folks. We're coming to our last but not least final 2 guests tonight. Again, staying on the topic of independent republicanism in the north of Ireland, but also looking at the issue of a united Ireland generally. We're joined now by independent Republican councillor Barry Monteith from Dungannon, which is in the Mid-Ulster ward, and we're also joined by the founder of prisoner support group ALU, Francis Quinn. Lads, thanks for joining us.
Thank you, Finbar.
Okay. Lads, I want to get straight stuck in. You guys are from the 1916 Societies, which is a well-known organisation around Ireland, north and south of Ireland, that originated, I think, by trying to prepare plans for the celebration of the 1916 centenary. But from there, the 1916 Societies seems to have developed into a campaign of sorts for one Ireland, one vote. Francis, could you give me a little bit of background on that?
Certainly will, Finbar. Just first of all, I would like to pass our sympathies to Jackie. It was fantastic listening to her, and it's all right. It was, our hearts go out to Jackie and for the loss of Nicole, and anything we can do up here to help, just ask. There's absolutely no problem. Certainly, you ask why should we go for United Ireland? Well, why not? Because people have been struggling in all different ways for hundreds of years, trying to get Irish unity. One of our strategies, the 1916 Societies, first of all, was founded in 2009. One of the strategies we adopted and a tactic we adopted was the One Ireland, One Vote campaign, which we're stating with, if you look at some of the polls at the moment, the Lucid Talk poll in the Irish News on the 27th of October reveals that 37% of people in the north even would vote for Irish unity. But also very interesting is that 43% of younger voters from 18 to 23 years of age would vote for Irish unity. So there's certainly an appetite there for it. And our tactic of a One Ireland, One Vote is asking the whole island of Ireland on one day, would they vote for Irish unity? And that's what the One Ireland, One Vote campaign is about.
Okay. And there was provisions, or is provisions, in the Good Friday Agreement, as far as I'm aware, for a plebiscite of vote within the politically defined area that the British government call Northern Ireland. My understanding is that when Good Friday was being negotiated, there was proposals from some of the nationalist side for an all-Ireland vote, but that was vigorously rejected by Tony Blair and his team at the time, and it was restricted to just a vote of that politically defined area that the British government called Northern Ireland. In terms of, is there a risk? Do you have any figures in the South in terms of what support would be for United Ireland in the South? Is there a risk that that vote could go wrong?
No, well, in fact, the last statistics were done by no friend of republicanism, was done by the Irish Times, and they quoted that 54% of the people polled said they would vote for Irish unity. Interestingly, 43% of them said they would pay more tax to live within United Ireland. So the figures certainly stack up. There's no doubt about that. We would intend, hopefully, going for a mock referendum at some stage, similar to the Catalonian campaign.
Okay, that's really interesting. Just moving forward to what your vision of, and I will come to you now in a wee second, Barry, what your vision of a United Ireland would be. Would it be, because I think in the South we have this naive or simplistic view that it would simply be sewing the 6 counties into the South. But in reality, it could be a little bit more complex than that. what kind of a United Ireland are we talking about here? Are we talking about an Éireann Nua type federal Ireland where the North Ulster or Ulster itself would have a level of independence but would be part of a federal government? What structure would a United Ireland look like in your mind?
Well, what we would be talking about would be in the Connolly's vision of a United Ireland, which would be a 32-county socialist republic. Now, strangely enough, there's very few documents to back that up that are out there at the moment, but there's one document that I have in my hand here, and it's the Democratic Programme for a New Century. And that's put together in conjunction with 1916 Society as a member of the Peter O'Donnell Socialist Republican Forum. And it outlines exactly the type of Ireland that we would want. And if anybody wants this information and wants to avail of this documentation, email the forumo'donnell@gmail.com, and we'll ensure that they get all that information. And every aspect of it is dealt with there. But even from the point of view of people used to talk about economics of it, there's no economist now that doesn't agree that two economies are basket cases, that one single economy is the only way forward. And that feeds into Irish unity, of course. What feeds into it at the moment also is Brexit. You've got a certain amount of soft unionism who are prepared to stay within Europe, which is another argument again, of course. But you have that element of people who are prepared to possibly lend their support to an Irish unity referendum. Now, on the internal 6-county border poll, the triple lock system was what was accepted, which is totally unacceptable to us, where the British government establish the question, they also establish who votes, and they also decide when they can call it. So it ain't going to happen.
Yeah, I know that in reality there has been a lot of resistance in certain circles to even a restricted vote within the 6 counties. I am aware of that. Barry, are you there?
Yep.
Yes, Barry. Just to remind you, Barry is also an independent Republican councillor based in Mid-Ulster in Dungannon. Barry, one of the main objections I hear to the idea of a United Ireland is the worry or the fear or the threat that there'll be bombs in Dublin, that there'll be a civil war of sorts in which loyalist elements, possibly supported by elements of MI5, etc., would actually start a terrorist campaign in the south of Ireland as a response to a looming United Ireland. What would you want to speak to that point?
I suppose I would say republicanism and the aspirations of the Irish people have always been denied by threats of violence. Go back 100 years ago, and we were threatened with terrible war, and this has always been a tactic of the British to threaten Ireland with military domination. But there have been bombs in Dublin before. And there's been very little talk or support for the victims of those bombs from the Free State or the 26 county establishment. So I think to talk about hypothetical bombs is wrong. We actually had a situation where a former minister of the 26 county government is actually questioning families of the Dublin Monaghan bombings for their efforts in documentaries that they're trying to do to promote and seek the truth of the death of their loved one. So the reality of it is, we should not be, the aspirations of the Irish people as a nation should not be denied on threats of violence. We have as much right to freedom and unity as any country or nation in the world.
Okay.
Just on that one point of the bombings in Dublin and Monaghan, let's be clear about this. They were carried out, and statistics and facts will prove it, were carried out by British military intelligence.
Okay, well, I'm not going to argue that point. I do know that there's continuing drip of evidence showing collusion between both British military intelligence and MI5, MI6 in relation to terrible atrocities in the north of Ireland and in the south of Ireland that have actually been ascribed to different groups, when in reality the main drivers, and the evidence, as you say, has come out in relation to that. But the reality is that as much as people might have a right to determine towards their sovereignty, if the threat exists of loyalist paramilitary backlash, is there any work, or would there be any value, and is there any work going on to try to talk to the members of the loyalist community, representatives of the loyalist community, to try to mitigate any potential paramilitary violence in the future if United Ireland looms?
Well, suppose the point I would make, Finbar, is the reality is loyalist violence is British military establishment violence. Okay. It doesn't appear on its own. It isn't organic on its own. At any time when loyalist organisations have attacked nationalists or Republicans or Irish people, it has been at the behest of the British government. So it's the British government who are responsible for arming and backing loyalists 100 years ago, for arming and backing loyalist and unionist militias at the time of the United Irishmen, and they're responsible for it in the last number of decades. So the reality of this is that's who's responsible for it. That's who armed them, and that's who maintained them, and that's who promoted them. So it's the British government that in any discourse around unification needs to make it loud and clear that they will stay out of our country and not interfere and not instigate interaction from those quarters. But what I would say is, and on my day-to-day work as local councillor, I speak to folk and work on behalf of folk from what we've deemed as loyalist areas in Tyrone here. And they're facing the same issues as us. They're facing economic uncertainty, poor housing, poor workers' rights. They're exactly the same issues as us. And the reality of it is, if a coherent, progressive, socialist workers' republic is put forward, there is a significant number of people who may not come out and vote or promote it within their own community, but they most certainly will not actively oppose it.
And just to follow up on what Barry said, you asked, was there any work being done? And I'm just looking at the screen now. I can see several people on it that are involved in that work, and we meet people on a weekly basis from the unionist community to discuss Brexit, the implications of Brexit, and to put our case forward for Irish unity. But we put it forward on a class basis, on Connolly base, and on the 1916 proclamation of cherishing all of the children equally. The sectarianism that's pontificated and pushed through the Stormont regime is an anathema to republicanism and an anathema to us all. It will get none of us anywhere. Moving forward to a united Ireland means moving forward together based on a 32-county socialist republic.
Okay, and what is when you're sitting around the table talking to representatives from the unionist community, how is that table? Is it cool? Has it warmed up over the last few years? What are those discussions and those talks like?
It's certainly warmed up, because at any stage, it's like, look at the French settlers in Algeria. Like when the Brits do decide to go, they're going to go, and the French settlers ended up trying to fight them, the French, to make them stay. That can't happen. I think there's a great realization among loyalists, particularly working class loyalists, who can see for themselves that they're being exploited and have been exploited all down the years. There's a certain realization coming into play that we might be better off in a different Ireland, in a united Ireland that works for the people and all of the people. A loaf of bread in the Shankill Road is the same price as a loaf of bread in Ballymun. It's better for all of us. Now, the health service is a big issue that people can, but we have to put forward plans. You'll see some of those plans in that democratic programme for a new century.
So, for independent Republicans in the north of Ireland, central to the plan to move towards unity is actually uniting the communities on working class and on social issues that everybody shares an interest in. And I think that's something that stands out with the Irish Republican movement, the independent Republican movement in the north of Ireland, that it's very much associated or linked to left-wing and socialist ideals to a large degree. Lads, we're way over our time because each interview ran over, but we're not just gone just yet. In terms of the 1916 Society's actual campaign, One Ireland, One Vote, what work have you guys done so far, and what work have you got planned for the future?
Well, what we have at the minute, we've got over 100,000 signatures. We've got an online petition, and we also do stalls, and we do stalls all around Ireland at different occasions. And we ask people to sign a petition for an All-Ireland referendum on Irish unity. And we're continuing that campaign. And
have you met any resistance because I know you're campaigning north and south, but especially south, have you met any resistance down here from the state in your campaign?
Not so much, to be honest with you. There hasn't been much resistance to it at all. A lot of the resistance up here would be coming from people who have accepted the status quo, let's say. I'll not even say Republicans, but people who have accepted the status quo, and they need Stormont to survive, that participates that whole sectarian divide. It's something that we aren't involved in.
Okay. As I say, we're getting tight for time, lads. First of all, can I just say I really appreciate you guys coming on. We don't hear independent Republican voices outside of the local authority chambers that they've been elected to and outside of their own communities. And I just want to repeat what Martin Luther King said, that a riot is the language of the unheard. And it's really important, and it's very important for Double Down, the programme, that we give voice to everybody in our communities. And that's why we've invited the lads on here this evening. And that's why we will be talking on this issue again into the future. Lads, really thanks a million for joining us. I would love to get you in to have a wee natter together, but we're 6 minutes over our time already, and we've got a couple of little things to go through before we close off. Thanks a million for joining us, lads.
Thank you.
Folks, that's nearly all for tonight. Next week we're going to be looking at the Irish language. Is it dead? Are Irish language campaigners flogging a dead horse? Or is there some value in all of us trying to learn couple of fuckle, as they say? We're also going to try to pre-record a special over the next few days to de-archive the archives in relation to the sealing of mother and baby home files. We have been talking to a number of mothers who came through the mother and baby homes, and we're going to give them an opportunity, without interruption from interviewers, as many as possible, to have 5 minutes each to say in audio and visual recording what they have wanted to say all their life, to give a little bit of their experience and to say what they've always wanted to say. And this will be an audio and visual archive that no government and no one can seal, and it will be open to the public. So look out for that special programme as well next week. Just before we go, some of the lighter sides of politics over the last week. Donald Trump, the president of the US of A, can always be relied on for a good laugh, can't he? He sure can. The Don this week decided that a border wall along the Mexican border to stop Mexican immigrants coming into the United States was not enough. He's decided, don't just build a border wall along the Mexican-US border. Let's build a wall in where? In Colorado. Run that clip there, Stephen, please.
New Mexico, which I think we're going to win. You know why we're going to win New Mexico? Because they want safety on their border. And they didn't have it. And we're building a wall on the border of New Mexico. And we're building a wall in Colorado. We're building a beautiful wall. A big one that really works, that you can't get over, you can't get under.
Someone get that man a map. My goodness. And we think we've got problems here. Okay, one final one. The tweet of the week. I think it could be the tweet of the month, in fact. Barry Cowan, the minister that got in trouble, not enough trouble, might I say, last month or 2 months ago for avoiding and escaping from guarded checkpoints. Well, Barry Cowan, Fianna Fáil TD, is in the tweet news again. He came out all high and mighty last week, or a few days ago, should I say, about COVID restrictions. And he gave this lovely pontification: retain level 3, work with it, implement it, adhere to it. Moving to 4 or 5 is running and hiding from COVID. Well, there's a guy called David Manning, and he gave a tweet play that couldn't be beaten. He said, where is it gone now? Don't want to lose this. Barry, it's an airborne virus, Barry, not a guarded checkpoint. I thought that was pretty good. Guys, join us next week. Look out for a special next week, Thursday, 10 p.m. online. Thanks for joining us tonight.